To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Perfect Facades. Raymond Sanders stood in his home office, reviewing the architectural blueprints for his latest project, a luxury resort in the Bahamas. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming from a scrappy kid from Detroit's rough neighborhoods into one of the most successful construction magnates on the East Coast. His company, Sanders & Associates, specialized in high-end residential developments and commercial complexes. The irony wasn't lost on him that a man who built structures for a living would soon have his own world come crashing down. "Daddy, look what I made." 8-year-old Emma Sanders wheeled into his office, her custom wheelchair navigating easily through the wide doorways Raymond had specifically designed when they'd built this house 5 years ago. She held up a crayon drawing of their family, stick figures of him, his wife Shalia, and herself, with "Best Family Ever" written in her careful child's handwriting. Raymond's expression softened as he knelt beside his daughter. Emma had been born with spina bifida, and while it meant she'd never walk, it had never diminished her bright spirit or infectious smile. She was the light of his life, the reason he worked so hard to build something lasting. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he said, pinning it to his bulletin board next to his business awards. "Where's Mommy?" "She's in the garden with Mr. Fisher again," Emma said, then lowered her voice conspiratorially. They were whispering about grown-up stuff. Raymond's jaw tightened slightly. Oliver Fisher was Shalia's business partner in her interior design venture, a venture that seemed to require an awful lot of private meetings. At 38, Shalia was still strikingly beautiful, with auburn hair and green eyes that had captivated him 15 years ago when they'd met at a charity gala. But lately, those eyes held secrets. Oliver Fisher was everything Raymond wasn't: smooth, cultured, old money from a Connecticut family. Where Raymond had calloused hands from years of construction work before he could afford to hire others, Oliver's hands were soft, manicured. Where Raymond spoke plainly and directly, Oliver was all charm and sophistication. "Why don't you go play in your room for a bit?" Raymond suggested to Emma. "I need to talk to Mommy." As Emma wheeled away, Raymond walked to the large window overlooking their backyard. Through the glass, he could see Shalia and Oliver standing close together by the rose garden, their body language intimate. Shalia threw her head back laughing at something Oliver said, then placed her hand on his chest. Raymond had suspected for months, but seeing it confirmed sent a cold fury through his veins. He'd grown up learning that betrayal was the worst sin. His own father had abandoned their family when times got tough, leaving Raymond to support his mother and younger sister. He'd sworn he'd never be weak like his father, never let anyone take advantage of him. But watching his wife of 13 years flirt openly with another man in their own backyard, Raymond felt something darker than anger. He felt the calculating coldness that had helped him destroy business competitors who tried to undercut him. That evening at dinner, Shalia was unusually animated, talking about a fantastic new project Oliver had proposed. Emma chattered about her day at school, and Raymond smiled and nodded, playing the perfect father and husband while his mind worked through possibilities. After Emma was tucked into bed, Raymond confronted Shalia in their bedroom. "We need to talk about Oliver," he said quietly. Shalia's face went pale, then flushed with defiance. "What about him?" "Don't insult my intelligence, Shalia. I've seen how you look at him, how he looks at you." "You're being ridiculous," she snapped, but her voice wavered. "He's my business partner. Business partners don't touch each other the way I saw you touching him today." Shalia's mask slipped entirely. "So what if they do? When was the last time you touched me, Raymond? When was the last time you looked at me like I was more than just Emma's mother and your trophy wife?" "Don't you dare make this about me," Raymond said, his voice deadly quiet. "I've given you everything. This house, your business, a life most people only dream of. You gave me things," Shalia shot back. "Oliver gives me attention. He makes me feel alive again. And what about Emma? What about our daughter?" "Emma will be fine. Children are resilient." The casual dismissal of their disabled daughter's well-being was the final straw. Raymond looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. Someone selfish and cruel enough to destroy their family for a fling with a pretty boy who'd probably move on to the next bored housewife within a year. "I want him gone," Raymond said. "And whatever this is, or I'll end it for you." Shalia laughed bitterly. Or what? You'll divorce me? Good luck keeping Emma if you do. Courts favor mothers, especially when the father is a cold, workaholic control freak. Raymond stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We'll see about that. As he left the room, Shalia called after him. Don't threaten me, Raymond. I know things about your business dealings that could ruin you. Raymond paused in the doorway, a chilling smile playing at his lips. Shalia, you have no idea who you're dealing with. But you're about to find out. Chapter 2, The Perfect Storm. 3 weeks later, Raymond stood on the balcony of their penthouse apartment in Manhattan, a property Shalia had insisted they buy for weekend getaways, but which Raymond now suspected was primarily used for her affairs. The apartment was on the 23rd floor, with spectacular views of Central Park. He'd been documenting Shalia's movements, hiring a private investigator, and consulting with his longtime lawyer, Jonathan Beard, about divorce proceedings. What he discovered was worse than simple adultery. Shalia and Oliver had been planning to leave together, taking Emma and half of Raymond's assets. The private investigator, a former cop named Caesar McCall, had provided photographs, recordings, and evidence that Shalia had been systematically moving money from their joint accounts into offshore holdings. She'd also been consulting with a divorce attorney known for vicious custody battles. She's planning to claim you're an unfit father, Caesar had reported. The lawyer she's seeing specializes in cases involving disabled children. They're going to argue that your work schedule and controlling personality make you a poor caregiver choice. The betrayal cut deeper than Raymond had imagined possible. But what truly enraged him was Shalia's willingness to use Emma as a weapon. Their daughter deserved better than to be caught in the middle of adult games. This particular weekend, Oliver had joined them at the Manhattan apartment. Raymond had watched them through hidden cameras he'd had installed, seeing them laugh about their plans for the future, plans that didn't include him but did include his money and his daughter. The balcony had a glass railing system that Raymond himself had designed and overseen the installation of 2 years prior. It was a point of pride, elegant, modern, and engineered to exceed all safety standards. But Raymond knew something Shalia didn't. The installation had required specific torque specifications for the mounting bolts. On Friday evening, while Shalia and Oliver were out at dinner, Raymond made modifications to the railing. Not enough to make it obviously dangerous, but enough to create a weakness that would fail under the right circumstances. Saturday morning dawned gray and drizzly. Emma was excited to be in the tall house, as she called it, and had asked to go out on the balcony to see the park. Raymond had initially said no, claiming it was too cold, but Shalia had overridden him. Don't be so overprotective, she'd snapped. Emma needs fresh air. Raymond watched from the living room as Shalia wheeled Emma onto the balcony. The plan had been for Shalia to lean against the railing herself. Raymond had expected her to go out alone for her morning coffee, as was her habit. He'd never intended for Emma to be involved. But as he watched through the glass door, he saw Shalia position Emma's wheelchair close to the railing so she could see over it better. Emma, excited by the view, reached out to point at something in the park below. That's when Oliver appeared, wrapping his arms around Shalia from behind. The additional weight and movement caused Shalia to bump into Emma's wheelchair, which knocked against the compromised railing. Everything happened in seconds. The railing gave way with a sharp crack, and Emma's wheelchair tilted forward. Shalia lunged to grab it, but the momentum was too much. Both Emma and her wheelchair tumbled over the edge. Raymond's roar of anguish was genuine as he rushed onto the balcony. 23 floors below, his daughter lay motionless on the concrete plaza. Chapter 3, The Frame. In the chaos that followed Emma's fall, Raymond's world shattered completely. The paramedics confirmed what he already knew in his heart. Emma had died on impact. His beautiful, bright daughter was gone, and it was his fault. His modification to the railing, meant to trap Shalia, had killed the only person in the world he truly loved. The guilt and rage warred inside him as he sat in the hospital waiting room, Shalia sobbing dramatically in Oliver's arms nearby. She was playing the grieving mother perfectly, but Raymond caught the calculating look she exchanged with Oliver when she thought no one was watching. Detective Warren Donahue arrived within hours, a grizzled veteran of the NYPD with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. He questioned all 3 adults separately, and Raymond could see the detective's suspicion growing with each interview. The railing failed, Raymond told the detective truthfully. I designed the whole balcony system myself 2 years ago. I don't understand how this could have happened. When Shalia gave her statement, however, she painted a very different picture. Raymond has been acting strange lately, she told Detective Donahue, tears streaming down her face. He's been angry about my business partnership with Oliver. He made threats, and he'd been working on the balcony recently. I saw him out there with tools last week. Oliver corroborated her story, adding his own embellishments. Raymond seemed obsessed with the railing system. He was always checking the bolts, adjusting things. Shalia was worried he might do something desperate. By Monday morning, the building's security footage had been reviewed, showing Raymond on the balcony Friday evening with a toolkit. The forensic examination of the railing revealed that the bolts had been loosened deliberately, exactly what Raymond had done, intending to create a failure that would harm Shalia. Detective Donahue arrested Raymond on charges of criminally negligent homicide and reckless endangerment. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Raymond looked directly at Shalia. "I know what you're doing," he said quietly, "and I know why." Shalia's performance was Oscar-worthy as she collapsed in grief. "How could you do this to our baby?" she wailed. "You always resented her disability. You never wanted her." The media picked up the story immediately. A wealthy businessman arrested for killing his disabled daughter in a fit of rage over his wife's affair. It was tabloid gold. By evening, news vans lined the street outside their Connecticut home. Shalia gave a tearful interview on the local news, Oliver's supporting hand on her shoulder. "He always hated having a disabled child," she wept. "Emma was such a burden to him. He worked constantly to avoid being home with her. I think he finally snapped." From his jail cell, Raymond watched the interview with cold fury. Shalia was systematically destroying his reputation while positioning herself as the grieving mother and Oliver as her supportive friend. She was even dressed in conservative black, playing the part of the widow though they weren't divorced. His lawyer, Jonathan Beard, visited him the next morning. Jonathan was Raymond's oldest friend, someone who'd known him since they were kids in Detroit. He was one of the few people who understood the depth of Raymond's love for Emma and the impossibility of him ever harming her. "The evidence looks bad, Ray," Jonathan said honestly. "Your fingerprints on the tools, security footage of you working on the railing, and now Shalia's statements painting you as an abusive father. The DA wants to add murder charges." "I modified the railing," Raymond admitted quietly. "But it was meant for Shalia, not Emma. I never wanted to hurt my daughter." Jonathan leaned forward. "Tell me everything. Every detail about Shalia, about Oliver, about what you discovered. If we're going to fight this, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Raymond spent the next hour laying out everything. The affair, the financial manipulation, Shalia's custody plans, her threats about his business dealings. Jonathan took notes, his expression growing grimmer. "She's been planning this for months," Jonathan realized. The affair, the money transfers, consulting with divorce attorneys. "Ray, what if Emma's death wasn't an accident?" "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Shalia knew you'd modified the railing. She even mentioned seeing you work on it. What if she deliberately put Emma in danger, knowing the railing would fail? She gets rid of the daughter she saw as a burden, frames you for murder, and inherits everything." The possibility hit Raymond like a physical blow. Could Shalia be that calculating? That evil? "I'll fix everything," Jonathan promised grimly. "But we need to be smart about this. Shalia thinks she's won, but she's made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" Jonathan smiled coldly. "She's underestimated exactly how ruthless you can be when someone threatens your family. And Emma was your family. She's going to pay for what she did to our little girl." As Jonathan left, Raymond sat in his cell and felt something crystallize inside him. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it was being transformed into something harder and more focused. Shalia had killed their daughter and was trying to destroy him. She'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Raymond Sanders had learned long ago that in the construction business, when a structure was compromised, you didn't just patch it up, you tore it down completely and built something stronger in its place. It was time to demolish Shalia's perfect plan and build his revenge from the ground up. Chapter 4: Buried Secrets. Jonathan Beard had been Raymond's friend for over 30 years, but he'd been practicing criminal law for 25. He knew that emotional cases required cold, methodical investigation, and the death of Emma Sanders was nothing if not emotional. While Raymond sat in jail awaiting trial, Jonathan assembled a team. He hired his own private investigator, Anthony Richmond, a former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes and had a reputation for uncovering the kind of secrets people killed to protect. I need everything on Shalia Sanders and Oliver Fisher, Jonathan told Anthony during their first meeting. Bank records, phone records, travel records, medical records, everything. And I need to know about their relationship timeline. When did it really start? Anthony's investigation began with the obvious, tracing the money Shalia had been moving. But what he found was more sophisticated than simple embezzlement. Shalia had been working with Oliver for over 2 years, using her interior design business as a front for money laundering. Oliver Fisher's background revealed he wasn't just old Connecticut money. His family's wealth came from a trust fund established by his grandfather, a man who'd made his fortune during Prohibition running liquor from Canada. The family had gone legitimate decades ago, but Oliver had been gradually draining the trust fund through bad investments and expensive habits. Here's where it gets interesting, Anthony reported to Jonathan a week later. Oliver's been in debt to some very dangerous people. The kind who don't just repossess your car when you can't pay. How much debt? $3 million, plus interest. He borrowed from a loan shark named Jamie Decker, who has connections to organized crime. The payments were due 6 months ago. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So Oliver needed money, and fast. Enter Shalia Sanders, married to a wealthy construction magnate. It gets better, Anthony continued. I traced Oliver's movements over the past year. He's been to the Cayman Islands 4 times, always shortly after Shalia made large transfers from the Sanders accounts. They've been systematically moving Raymond's money offshore. But it was Anthony's next discovery that changed everything. Jonathan, I need you to see this. Anthony spread out medical records on the desk. I pulled Shalia's medical files from the past 5 years. Look at this. The records showed multiple visits to a psychiatrist, Dr. Reginald Ollie, over the past 18 months. The notes, obtained through a legal warrant Jonathan had managed to secure, painted a disturbing picture. Shalia had been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial tendencies. Dr. Ali's notes described her as showing a concerning lack of empathy for her disabled daughter and expressing resentment about the burden of caregiving. More damning was a session note from 3 months before Emma's death. Patient expressed fantasies about being free of family obligations. When pressed about her daughter, patient stated that some people aren't meant to live. Recommended immediate family therapy, but patient declined. Jesus, Jonathan breathed. She was planning this for months. There's more, Anthony said grimly. I found Emma's medical records too. Did you know that Shalia had been skipping Emma's physical therapy appointments? The child's condition was deteriorating because she wasn't receiving proper care. Jonathan felt sick. Emma had been suffering, and Shalia had been neglecting her deliberately, making her even more vulnerable. But Anthony's final discovery was the smoking gun they needed. I accessed the security system for the Manhattan apartment building, Anthony explained. The building has internal cameras in the hallways and elevator areas. Look at this footage from the night before Emma died. The security video showed Oliver arriving at the apartment building at 11:47 p.m. on Friday night. But more importantly, it showed him leaving at 2:15 a.m., then returning again at 6:30 a.m. Saturday morning, less than 2 hours before Emma's fall. He was there when Raymond modified the railing, Jonathan realized. But he left and came back. What? Anthony smiled grimly. Because he needed to make his own modifications. I had a structural engineer examine the railing remains. The bolts weren't just loosened. They were deliberately weakened in a specific pattern that would cause catastrophic failure under minimal stress. But Raymond admitted to loosening them. Raymond loosened them to create a failure if an adult leaned against them. Oliver remodified them to ensure they'd fail with much less pressure, like the weight of a child in a wheelchair. The implication was staggering. Oliver had taken Raymond's sabotage and turned it into something far more deadly, ensuring that Emma would be the victim instead of Shalia. They used Raymond's guilt against him, Jonathan said, understanding flooding through him. They knew he'd blame himself and wouldn't fight the charges effectively. Over the next 2 weeks, Anthony uncovered the full scope of Shalia and Oliver's plan. They'd been planning Emma's death for months, waiting for the right opportunity. Raymond's modification of the railing had been the perfect cover. They could blame him while positioning themselves as grieving survivors. The insurance policies were the final piece. Shalia had increased Emma's life insurance policy to $2 million just 6 months earlier, claiming it was necessary because of her medical needs. Combined with the money they'd already stolen and the inheritance Shalia would receive as Raymond's widow after his conviction, they'd have enough to pay off Oliver's debts and start a new life. But Jonathan had one more card to play. He'd been investigating quietly, building an airtight case, but he needed Shalia and Oliver to reveal themselves. He needed them to make a mistake. "Anthony, I want you to leak something to the media," Jonathan instructed. "Let them know that new evidence has emerged that might exonerate Raymond. Don't be specific, just hint that there are questions about the investigation. You want to flush them out? I want them to panic. Panic people make mistakes. And when they do, we'll be watching." Chapter 5, The Trap Springs. The leaked story hit the evening news 3 days later. A source close to the investigation had suggested that new evidence might cast doubt on Raymond Sanders' guilt in his daughter's death. The report was vague but mentioned inconsistencies in witness statements and possible alternative theories. Jonathan watched the news from his office, then immediately drove to the jail to see Raymond. "What are you up to, Jonathan?" Raymond asked as soon as his lawyer sat down. "I'm setting a trap, and I need you to play your part perfectly." Jonathan explained what they discovered about Shalia and Oliver's plan, the financial crimes, the medical records, and most importantly, the evidence that Oliver had remodified the railing to ensure Emma's death. Raymond's reaction was volcanic. He slammed his fist against the table so hard it cracked, his face twisted with rage. "They killed her. They actually killed Emma and blamed me for it. Ray, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Jonathan said urgently. "We have evidence, but we need more. We need them to confess, or at least say something that proves their guilt. I'm going to arrange for you to have a phone call with Shalia. The calls are recorded, but she doesn't know we have outside evidence yet. What do you want me to say?" "Nothing directly. Just let her think you're broken, that you're ready to confess to everything. Let her gloat. Give her enough rope to hang herself." 2 days later, Jonathan arranged for Raymond to call Shalia from jail. He'd convinced her it was necessary for closure and that Raymond wanted to apologize. The call was recorded, and Anthony had positioned surveillance outside the Connecticut house where Shalia and Oliver were now living openly together. "Shalia," Raymond said when she answered, his voice carefully crafted to sound defeated. "I need to talk to you." "Raymond." Her voice was cold. "I don't think we have anything to discuss." "I know what I did," Raymond continued. "I know I killed Emma. I can't live with it anymore." There was a pause. Then Shalia's voice became calculating. "The police say you're planning to change your plea to guilty. I should. I deserve whatever happens to me. But Shalia, I need to know something. Did you know? When you put Emma near the railing that morning, did you know it would fail?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. When Shalia finally spoke, there was something different in her voice, a hint of satisfaction she couldn't quite hide. "How could I have known? You're the one who sabotaged it. But you saw me working on it that Friday night. You mentioned it to the police. I saw you with tools, yes. I had no idea what you were planning." Raymond pressed harder, following Jonathan's script. "I keep thinking about how you positioned her wheelchair right against the railing. Almost like you wanted her to." "Stop," Shalia snapped. "Don't you dare try to blame me for your actions. Emma is dead because of you. Because you couldn't handle having a defective child." The word defective sent rage coursing through Raymond's veins, but he forced himself to stay in character. "You're right. I was a terrible father. Emma deserved better." "She did deserve better," Shalia agreed, and now there was definitely satisfaction in her voice. "She deserved a father who loved her instead of seeing her as a burden. She deserved a life without pain." "Without pain." Do you have any idea what it was like, Raymond? Watching her struggle every day, knowing she'd never have a normal life? Never walk, never run, never experience the things other children do? Maybe this was a mercy. Raymond's hand tightened on the phone. Even playing a part, he could barely contain his fury at hearing his beloved daughter discussed so callously. "Sometimes I think she's better off now," Shalia continued, her voice taking on an almost dreamy quality. Free from all that suffering. Free from being a burden on everyone around her. In the background, Raymond could hear Oliver's voice. "Shalia, maybe you shouldn't." "It's fine," Shalia said, apparently covering the phone briefly. When her voice returned, it was sharper. "The point is, Raymond, you did this. You killed our daughter. and now you need to face the consequences. What about us? Raymond asked. What about our marriage? Shalia laughed, a cold sound. Our marriage ended the moment I realized what kind of man you really are. Oliver has been more of a husband to me in 6 months than you were in 13 years. Oliver's a good man, Raymond said, feeding her ego. Emma liked him. Emma was too young to understand. But yes, Oliver would have been a wonderful stepfather. He understood that some children need special consideration. The phrase special consideration made Raymond's blood run cold. On the surveillance feed Anthony was monitoring, they could see Oliver frantically trying to get Shalia to hang up, but she was too lost in her moment of triumph. I should go, Raymond said finally. Thank you for talking to me, Shalia. I know now that everything happened the way it was supposed to. Yes, Shalia agreed, her voice soft with satisfaction. Sometimes fate takes care of problems we can't solve ourselves. After the call ended, Raymond sat in his cell, his whole body shaking with rage. But when Jonathan visited him an hour later, he was eerily calm. Did you get what you needed? Raymond asked. More than we needed, Jonathan replied grimly. But Ray, there's something else. Anthony's been monitoring their communications since the news story broke. They're planning to leave the country. When? Tomorrow night. They've booked flights to the Cayman Islands, then connecting to a country with no extradition treaty. They're going to disappear with your money and live happily ever after. Raymond was quiet for a long moment, then looked up at his lawyer with eyes like winter. No, they're not. What do you mean? Jonathan, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. And I need you to not ask questions about the details. Chapter 6. The Reckoning begins. At 3 a.m. on the morning Shalia and Oliver were scheduled to flee the country, Raymond Sanders walked out of jail a free man. Jonathan had worked through the night with a sympathetic judge, presenting the recorded phone call, the surveillance evidence, and the financial records that proved Shalia and Oliver's conspiracy. The judge had immediately issued arrest warrants for both conspirators and released Raymond on his own recognizance pending the dismissal of all charges. But Raymond had no intention of waiting for the slow wheels of justice to turn. Anthony Richmond was waiting outside the jail with a black SUV and a grim expression. They're at the house packing, he reported. Flight leaves at 6 a.m. Have you been monitoring them all night? Every move. They think they're home free. Shalia's been celebrating with champagne. Raymond climbed into the passenger seat, his jaw set like granite. Any word from Caesar? He's in position with the others. Everything's ready. Raymond had spent his time in jail well, using his one phone call per day to contact old associates from his construction days, men who'd worked the rough neighborhoods of Detroit before following him to success. Men who understood that some debts could only be paid in blood. Caesar McCall had assembled a team of 5 others, all former construction workers who'd become successful in their own right, but still remembered the code of the streets. Loyalty above all, and swift punishment for betrayal. What about the money? Raymond asked. All traced and frozen. Turned out they were using 3 different banks in the Caymans. FBI's already coordinating with international authorities. They won't see a dime of it. As they drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the Connecticut house, Raymond felt a cold satisfaction settling over him. Shalia and Oliver had killed his daughter and tried to destroy his life. They'd shown no mercy, no remorse, no humanity. He would return the favor. The house was dark except for lights in the master bedroom where Shalia and Oliver were presumably packing. Raymond used his key to enter silently through the back door, Anthony and 2 of Caesar's men following behind him. They moved through the house like ghosts, Raymond's intimate knowledge of every room and floorboard allowing them to avoid the spots that creaked. When they reached the stairs, Raymond could hear Shalia's voice floating down from above. I can't believe it worked, she was saying, her tone giddy with excitement. Raymond actually thinks it was all his fault. The poor little murderer, rotting in jail while we're about to become very wealthy expatriates. Oliver's voice was more cautious. I still think we moved too fast. What if someone figures out what really happened? How could they? Raymond confessed to tampering with the railing. The insurance money will be transferred to the Cayman account as soon as the death certificate is processed. And with Raymond convicted of murder, I inherit everything automatically. What about Emma? Don't you feel anything about? About what? Shalia's voice turned sharp. About being free of a burden that was going to drain our resources for the rest of her life? Oliver, that child would never have had a normal life. She would have been dependent on us forever, sucking away our money, our freedom, our future. This way, she's at peace, and we get to live. Raymond reached the top of the stairs as Shalia continued her callous rant. Besides, Raymond never really loved her anyway. He was always working, always finding excuses to avoid spending time with his special daughter. I did him a favor, really. Now he doesn't have to pretend to be a caring father anymore. That was enough. Raymond stepped into the doorway of the master bedroom, his presence immediately commanding attention. Shalia and Oliver froze, their faces going white with shock. "Hello, darling," Raymond said softly. "Surprised to see me?" Shalia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, while Oliver took a step backward toward the window. "I heard the most interesting conversation just now," Raymond continued, his voice deadly calm. "Something about Emma being a burden. About her being better off dead. About doing me a favor." "Raymond," Shalia finally managed to speak, her voice shaking. "How did you're supposed to be in jail?" "I was. Until your recorded confession reached the right ears. Turns out judges don't like it when people murder children and frame innocent parents." Oliver made a sudden move toward the bedside table, but Anthony appeared in the doorway behind Raymond, his hand inside his jacket. "I wouldn't," Anthony said mildly. "You killed my daughter," Raymond said, each word precisely enunciated. "You planned it, you executed it, and then you tried to destroy me. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" "We can explain," Oliver started, but Raymond cut him off with a gesture. "Oh, you'll explain. You'll explain everything. But first, you're going to understand something very important." Raymond's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I built my fortune by being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than everyone around me. I survived the streets of Detroit, outmaneuvered corporate sharks, and crushed competitors who thought they could take what was mine." He stepped closer to them, his presence filling the room with menace. "But Emma wasn't business. Emma was my heart. She was the only pure, innocent thing in my world. And you killed her for money." Shalia tried to run for the door, but found her way blocked by Caesar McCall, whose scarred face and imposing bulk made it clear that escape wasn't an option. "The police are coming," Raymond announced. "You'll be arrested, tried, and convicted. You'll spend the rest of your lives in prison. But before that happens, you're going to experience exactly what Emma felt in her last moments." "What do you mean?" Oliver's voice cracked. Raymond smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Shalia had ever seen. "You're going to fall." Chapter 7. The Truth Revealed. The courthouse was packed as the trial of Shalia Sanders and Oliver Fisher began 3 months later. Raymond sat in the front row, having been completely exonerated when the full scope of the conspiracy came to light. The media had dubbed it the balcony murder plot, and every major news outlet was covering the proceedings. District Attorney Karen Best had taken the case personally after seeing the evidence Jonathan Beard had compiled. The recorded phone conversation, the financial records, the surveillance footage, and the expert testimony about the railing modifications painted a picture of calculated murder that shocked even seasoned prosecutors. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," DA Best began her opening statement. "This is a case about greed, manipulation, and the cold-blooded murder of an innocent child. The defendants, Shalia Sanders and Oliver Fisher, conspired to kill 8-year-old Emma Sanders and frame her father for the crime. In the defendants' chairs, Shalia and Oliver sat with their separate attorneys. Shalia had hired Reginald Ali's law firm, no relation to her psychiatrist, while Oliver was represented by a public defender after his family's money had been frozen by federal authorities. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Anthony Richmond testified about the financial investigation, showing how Shalia and Oliver had systematically looted Raymond's accounts. The structural engineer explained how the railing had been modified twice, once by Raymond to create a potential failure under adult weight, and again by Oliver to ensure it would fail catastrophically under minimal pressure. But it was Dr. Reginald Ali's testimony that truly shocked the courtroom. "In my professional opinion," the psychiatrist said, "Mrs. Sanders showed clear signs of narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. She demonstrated a disturbing lack of empathy for her disabled daughter and expressed what I documented as eliminative fantasies regarding family members she viewed as burdens." "Can you explain what you mean by eliminative fantasies?" DA Best asked. "She fantasized about being free of her daughter's care requirements." When I suggested that these thoughts were concerning and recommended family therapy, she became hostile and eventually stopped attending sessions. The recorded phone conversation was played for the jury, Shalia's own words condemning her as she spoke callously about Emma's death being a mercy and fate taking care of problems we can't solve ourselves. Raymond testified on the third day, his composed demeanor hiding the rage that still burned within him. He admitted to modifying the railing, but explained his intent had been to harm Shalia, not Emma. I discovered my wife's affair and her plans to leave me, taking Emma and half my assets, he testified. I was angry and hurt, and I made a terrible decision to sabotage the railing hoping to frighten or harm my wife. But I never, ever intended for Emma to be hurt. She was the light of my life. Under cross-examination, Shalia's attorney tried to paint Raymond as an abusive father, but the prosecution's character witnesses, Emma's teachers, doctors, and therapists, all testified to Raymond's devotion to his daughter. Mr. Sanders attended every medical appointment, testified Emma's physical therapist, Candace Holden. He was always asking questions about how to help Emma at home. Some fathers of disabled children distanced themselves, but Mr. Sanders was completely dedicated to his daughter's care and happiness. The defense's case fell apart when Oliver took the stand in his own defense. Under D.A. Best's relentless cross-examination, he broke down and admitted to remodifying the railing. I didn't want Emma to die, he sobbed. But Shalia said it was the only way. She said Emma would never have a normal life, that she was suffering. Shalia convinced me we were doing the right thing. The right thing? D.A. Best's voice was incredulous. You're saying that murdering an 8-year-old child was the right thing? Shalia said. She said Raymond would go to prison, and we'd use his money to help other disabled children. She made it sound like we were being merciful. The jury's faces showed exactly what they thought of that explanation. Shalia's attorney tried to argue that she was mentally ill and not responsible for her actions, but Dr. Ali's return testimony destroyed that defense. While Mrs. Sanders does have personality disorders, she was completely capable of understanding right from wrong. Her actions were planned, calculated, and executed with full awareness of their consequences. This was not the product of mental illness. It was the product of selfishness and greed. On the final day of testimony, the prosecution played security footage from the morning of Emma's death. The jury watched in silence as Shalia deliberately positioned Emma's wheelchair close to the compromised railing, then allowed Oliver's embrace to create the momentum that would send the child to her death. In the video, you could see Shalia's face for just a moment after Emma fell, and there was no surprise there, no shock. Only a brief look of satisfaction before she began her performance of grief. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Chapter 8. The Verdict. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Kathleen Chase asked as the packed courtroom held its breath. We have, Your Honor, replied the jury foreman, a middle-aged man whose grim expression gave no hint of mercy. On the charge of murder in the first degree against Emma Sanders, how do you find the defendant Shalia Sanders? Guilty. Shalia's composure finally cracked completely. She began sobbing hysterically, her attorney struggling to calm her as the judge continued. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find the defendant Oliver Fisher? Guilty. On the charges of fraud and money laundering? Guilty on all counts. Raymond felt a cold satisfaction as he watched his wife's complete breakdown. Justice for Emma was finally being served. Judge Chase set sentencing for the following week, but everyone in the courtroom knew what was coming. The state was seeking life without parole for both defendants. As court adjourned and the defendants were led away in shackles, Shalia turned to look at Raymond one last time. Her face was streaked with tears and makeup, her expensive clothes rumpled, her perfect facade finally stripped away. I loved her too, she mouthed silently. Raymond stared back at her with eyes like Arctic ice and mouthed back. No, you didn't. And now you'll have the rest of your life to think about what you did to her. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed Raymond and Jonathan. Most of the questions focused on how Raymond felt about the verdict, whether he could ever forgive his wife, if he planned to pursue additional civil suits. Raymond answered them all with professional composure, but when a young reporter asked if he would ever be able to move past Emma's death, his mask slipped for just a moment. My daughter was murdered by 2 people who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience, he said, his voice thick with suppressed emotion. They killed her for money and tried to destroy me in the process. The verdict today doesn't bring Emma back, but it ensures that her killers will never hurt another child. Do you forgive them? Another reporter called out. Raymond's expression hardened. No, I will never forgive them. Some acts are unforgivable, and murdering an innocent child is one of them. That evening, Raymond returned to his Connecticut home alone for the first time in months. The house felt enormous and empty, without Emma's laughter echoing through the halls. He found himself in her room, sitting in the chair where he used to read her bedtime stories. On her desk was the drawing she'd made the day before her death, the stick figure family with "Best Family Ever" written across the top. Raymond picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, baby girl," he whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from the monsters. But they'll never hurt anyone else now." His phone rang, interrupting his grief. It was Jonathan. "Ray, you need to know something. I just got word from my contact at the DA's office. Oliver's been trying to make a deal. He wants to testify about other things Shalia's done in exchange for a reduced sentence." "What other things?" "He claims she's done this before. That Emma wasn't her first victim." Raymond felt the cold fury rising in him again. "What do you mean?" "He says there was another child. A stepson from her first marriage that died in a suspicious accident 7 years ago. The authorities ruled it accidental drowning, but Oliver says Shalia told him she helped it along." The revelation hit Raymond like a physical blow. Shalia wasn't just a murderer. She was a serial killer who targeted children. And he'd lived with her for 13 years, trusted her with Emma's life. "I want you to investigate this," Raymond said, his voice deadly calm. "I want to know everything about her first marriage, about that child's death, about every person she's ever harmed." "Ray, the police will handle that now that Oliver's talking. I don't care about the police. I want to know for myself." "And Jonathan?" "Yeah. I want you to find the father of that first child. I think he and I need to have a conversation." Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold October morning, exactly 1 year after Emma's death. The courtroom was again packed, but this time there were additional faces. Family members of Shalia's first husband and stepson, who had flown in from California after Oliver's revelations had prompted authorities to reopen the 7-year-old drowning case. Judge Chase had reviewed all the evidence, the victim impact statements, and the defendant's pleas for mercy. Neither Shalia nor Oliver showed any remorse during their allocution, instead trying to shift blame and minimize their roles in Emma's death. "Before I impose sentence," Judge Chase said, her voice heavy with disgust, "I want to address the defendants directly. In 30 years on the bench, I have never encountered such calculated evil. You murdered an innocent, disabled child for money. You showed no mercy, no compassion, no humanity. Therefore, you will receive none from this court." She turned to Shalia first. "Shalia Sanders, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on the murder charge. On the conspiracy and fraud charges, you are sentenced to an additional 25 years to run consecutively. You will die in prison." Shalia's knees buckled, and she had to be supported by her attorney. "Oliver Fisher, while your cooperation with authorities investigating other crimes shows some small recognition of wrongdoing, it does not diminish your responsibility for Emma Sanders' death. You are sentenced to life in prison without parole, with an additional 15 years on the conspiracy charges." As the defendants were led away for the final time, Raymond felt a sense of completion. Justice had been served, but his work wasn't finished. 3 days later, Raymond met with Marcus Webb, the father of Shalia's first stepson, Tommy. Marcus was a broken man, a widower who had lost both his wife to cancer and his son to what he believed was a tragic accident. They met at a quiet restaurant in Los Angeles, two fathers united by their loss and their hatred for the woman who had destroyed their families. "I should have seen it," Marcus said, his voice heavy with guilt. "Tommy was such a good swimmer. He'd been taking lessons since he was 4. But Shalia said he must have had a cramp, that she tried to save him but couldn't reach him in time." "She's a master manipulator," Raymond replied. "She fooled me for 13 years. You couldn't have known." "The police want to exhume Tommy's body," Marcus continued. "They think they might find evidence that she held him under. Oliver told them she admitted to it, said it was another mercy killing because Tommy was acting out and giving her trouble." Raymond's hands clenched into fists. 2 children. She murdered 2 children. "I want her to pay for Tommy too," Marcus said fiercely. I want her to stand trial for his murder. She will, Raymond promised. And this time, I'm going to make sure she gets the death penalty. Over the following months, Raymond used his wealth and connections to ensure that Shalia's case received maximum attention. He hired additional investigators to uncover every detail of Tommy's death, funded victim advocacy groups, and worked tirelessly to ensure that Tommy Webb would receive justice just as Emma had. The evidence that emerged was damning. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera showed Shalia holding Tommy underwater for nearly 2 minutes before calling for help. Oliver's testimony, combined with forensic evidence from the exhumed body, led to murder charges in California. Shalia was extradited to face trial for Tommy's murder, while Oliver remained in New York to serve his sentence. During transport, she made one final attempt to reach out to Raymond, sending him a letter through her attorney. Raymond, the letter read, I know you hate me, and I understand why. But I need you to know that I did love Emma in my own way. I loved her enough to spare her a lifetime of suffering. I loved her enough to set her free from pain. Please try to understand that everything I did came from love. Raymond read the letter once, then burned it. There was no love in what Shalia had done, only selfishness, greed, and a monstrous lack of empathy. She had murdered 2 innocent children and tried to justify it as mercy. At Shalia's California trial, Raymond testified about Emma's life, about how happy and full of joy she had been despite her disability. He described her dreams, her artwork, her infectious laughter, and her boundless love for everyone around her. Emma wasn't suffering, he told the jury. She was thriving. She had friends, hobbies, plans for the future. The defendant didn't end her suffering. She ended her life because Emma was inconvenient to her plans. The California jury took even less time than the New York jury had. Shalia was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. On the day of her sentencing, Raymond was asked by reporters if he would attend her execution when it finally took place. No, he said firmly. I won't give her the satisfaction of seeing me there. She took my daughter away from me, but I won't let her take any more of my time or energy. Emma deserves better than that. What about forgiveness? A reporter pressed. Don't you think people can change, that there's always hope for redemption? Raymond's expression was carved from granite. Some people forfeit their right to forgiveness when they cross certain lines. Murdering children is one of those lines. Shalia Sanders and Oliver Fisher made their choices, and now they have to live with the consequences for the rest of their lives. What about Oliver's cooperation in exposing other crimes? Doesn't that count for something? Oliver's cooperation was self-serving. He only talked when he realized he was going down anyway. A truly remorseful person would have come forward before they were caught, would have prevented Tommy's case from being forgotten. Instead, he stayed silent for 7 years while Marcus Webb grieved for a son he thought died accidentally. As Raymond walked away from the courthouse for the final time, he felt the weight of the past 2 years settling on his shoulders. Emma was gone, and nothing would ever bring her back. But her killers would never hurt another child, and 2 families had finally received justice for their lost sons. Raymond returned to his construction business, throwing himself into work with renewed purpose. He established the Emma Sanders Foundation, providing support and resources for families with disabled children. He built playgrounds with wheelchair-accessible equipment, funded medical research, and created scholarship programs. But he never remarried, never had other children, and never spoke to any of his former friends who had doubted his innocence during the darkest days of his ordeal. He had learned that betrayal left scars that never fully healed, and that some relationships, once broken, could never be repaired. Raymond Sanders had been a man who built things his entire life. But the most important thing he'd ever built wasn't a skyscraper or a bridge, it was justice for his daughter. And unlike his other constructions, this one would stand forever. In her memory, he would never forgive, never forget, and never again trust anyone completely with the things he held most dear. Some structures, once destroyed, were meant to stay that way. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.